Tonight is Monday, October 28th, 2024. This is a special meeting of the School District of Waukesha Board of Education. I'll call the meeting to order. Mrs. Ettinger, would you please take the roll call?
Mark Borowski.
Here.
Eric Brooks.
Here.
Thomas Harland.
Here.
Betty Koenig.
Here.
Carrie Kozlowski.
Here.
Diane Voigt. David Wad.
Here.
Anthony Zenobia.
Here.
Kelly Piasek.
Here. And for the record, Mrs. Voigt is excused for this evening. Mrs. Ettinger, can you verify that the meeting has been properly posted?
Yes, it has.
Thank you. All right, tonight we are here to consider the approval of the final 2024-25 school year budget and tax levy. These action items will bring to a close a 12-month budget development process. It should be noted that starting next month, the district will begin work on the 2025-2026 budget. The Board of Education welcomes public input throughout the process as we work toward final approval next October. To start tonight's conversation, I'll turn it over to Mr. Clark, the district's Chief Financial Officer, who will present the recommended budget and tax levy. Mr. Clark.
Thank you. We've certainly had a lot of conversations about this, so I thought I would just present kind of the highlights. I've handed out tonight Waukesha County K-12 school districts. The file in board docs is near final. This is what they're presenting to their boards. Not all of them have taken formal action, so it's not final, but more than likely it is. And I think it's puts us in a good light in terms of the level of taxation compared to our neighbors. And then the other thing, the tax scenario sheet that I know FNF's probably seen that document 10 times it seems like, but kind of the path and how we got to where we are tonight. So I'll just touch on a few, as I mentioned, a few things. One thing, we always start our presentations with a slide on how we're doing with resident enrollment. And I always tell my board members, if you want to get a quick feel of how we're doing financially, I don't care what school district you are in, find out where your resident enrollment's going. And ours has been steadily declining. We're not alone. Majority of school districts in the state are declining as well. So our high point was in 2012, when we were over 13,000 kids, and we just completed our fall of 2024. We're at just under 10,600 resident students in our school district. The adoption format of our budget is on page 5, I believe, of your booklet. And these are just all of our funds, so I would ask anyone who's interested in more details, pages 5 through 16 offer detail on each fund. But Fund 10 and 27 are our main operational budget. Fund 10 is everything that you think about with schools. It's buses, it's lights, it's students, it's desks, it's textbooks. And then Fund 27 is where we track all special ed costs. Referendum debt's another big one, Fund 39. This is our mortgage payment on our outstanding bonds, which we'll talk about in a little greater detail. And then the rest of them are capital improvement based funds. And I would just note on Fund 41, there's use of a lot of fund balance, and that's the spend down of our Phase 3 capital improvement projects that the board approved last fall. That's the south bleachers, the auditorium upgrades, HVAC work at South, the chillers at West, and those types of projects. For a lot of reasons, it's crossed into this fiscal year, and those costs will be captured in 24-25. So we're looking at a total revenue budget of just over $219 million and a total expenditure budget of $226,725,000 in expenditures for fiscal year 24-25. Comparing last year to this year, budget to budget, revenues this year are down 0.97% and expenditures are down 5.28% in Fund 10, or $9.2 million. And that's really the ESSER impact. Those costs, those projects, and the revenue didn't always match up perfectly, and that's just us closing out. So ESSER's been completely closed. There is no budgeted ESSER dollars in the 24-25 budget. One thing that I think it's important to note is we every year kind of transition to the areas of greatest need in the district administratively. We are seeing a sizable increase in our special education budget of 7.97%. I don't think it's any secret that there's a lot more demand for those services than there has been in the past, and we're doing our best to move as many resources into that area as we can. As was mentioned, this is a 12-month-long process. There's a lot of decisions this board makes throughout that 12-month process, whether it's wages or benefits or service contracts and all these. So this is all those decisions rolling up into one document to estimate the cost of all those. And then lastly, I always add, we're in full compliance with state of Wisconsin revenue limit legislation. So we are living within our budget, and I think strategically using fund balance when it fits our plan and fits into our overall financial goals. Taxation, it's always a hot topic this time of year, and especially in a few months when everyone gets an envelope from the county saying what your tax bill is. So in the preliminary budget, I remember at F&F in particular, we had a lengthy conversation because of the defeasance of Fund 39 and the options we had. It really left us with a lot of options, right? Which is great. Flexibility is great, but it also means we had a lot of options in coming to a consensus of what to present in the preliminary budget. So we went with a 1% levy increase. I'm pleased to say that the final budget, state aid did come in favorable, and there's a long story about state aid and the things we had to make some assumptions on, but it came in very favorable for us this year. So this budget, as presented, has a 2.47 levy decrease. So we saw the 1% increase as kind of the highest we were going to go. Not to speak for the board, but that was the consensus I thought I heard. So we met that objective. So here's the levy with a couple years of history. We're kind of right back where we were. In 21-22, we had a 10% levy increase, and that might have been one of the quickest things forgotten in Waukesha history, because the next year we had a 2.88% increase, and I was always like, well, don't I get credit for the 10? Not that it's my doing, we're just following formulas. But we're right back kind of where we were at the beginning of 22-23 in terms of the levy, and we'll talk about our long-term debt here in a second, about where this levy could be heading in the next couple of years. I think it's good to provide some history. So in the budget booklet in the back, there's a 25-year history of the levy, the rate, and property valuations, because you don't remember. So I instill those, and most often it's so I can remember and have a document I can look back to myself. But I think it's a really good historical, quick measure for people who want to know, because they look at taxation generally as a year-to-year move, right? But do they know that the levy we approved tonight was what our levy was several years ago? And I think in a couple levy cycles, we could have a levy that we haven't seen in decades, potentially. So over the last 3 years, the average change in the levy is negative 3.26%. The average change over the last 5 years is negative 1.47, and the 10-year average is an increase of 0.21. So basically, we've been flat. Now, it's not a nice, flat, even road. It's ups and downs, and things change, and different state budgets move that number. But overall, we have, I think, a pretty good taxation story to tell. As I mentioned, the defeasance has given us a lot of options. So this budget includes the defeasance or pre-funding of $1.6 million in revenue. We no longer have, and I only put this in because these funds were in our budgets for decades, and they're no longer in our 2-year look-back period, but Fund 38, which was non-referendum approved debt, and the Fund 43, which was the proceeds of the bonds from the referendum, went in there. Those are no longer part of our document. And as I mentioned earlier, the spend down of Fund 41 fund balance is part of the what we call Phase 3 capital improvement projects that will come to an end next summer. So that's a planned spend down of Fund 41 fund balance. Defeasance or prepaying of, or pre-funding of debt payments in the next couple of years. Actually, we think next fall will be our last year where we will have a debt service levy, meaning you'll see a drop of $5.4 million on that line item next year in the levy. To date, not including the payment of the bonds on their call date in April of 2026, we've already, from what was presented to the public, already saved $1.7 million of interest costs to the taxpayers. This is just a scenario, and don't hold it to me because these will not be our levies in any of the upcoming years. But I just wanted to isolate Fund 39, and I made this assumption, if every other levy just stayed flat, you know, what happens to our levies? So this year, we're budgeting or levying $7.9 million for debt service. Next year, it'll be around here. Now, that number will move a little bit because of interest earnings, what are we getting on our money, and things like that. It'll drop to $2.5 million, so we'll have a cushion to hopefully stabilize our taxation and provide some relief of $5.4 million built in. Now, there'll be a brand-new state biennial budget. If you're not aware, there's elections next week. There's new maps for our representatives. There's all these things that could negate that $5.4 million in theory. But that's a pretty sizable cushion. And then ideally, we would come, because part of my thinking is when the new biennial budget hits, and if there is a huge bump in funding or a reduction in aid, it'll more than likely hit in the first year of the biennial budget. So we've weighted it towards 25, 26. But then we've also baked in a $2.5 million drop in the Fund 39 levy for 26, 27 to provide us the opportunity for maybe 3 years in a row of a dropping levy. Best laid plans, but you know, I think it's a solid plan. So just if you look at the 25, 26 column, from where we are today and what you're hopefully going to approve tonight, we're at a 6.8% levy drop if everything else stays constant. That's a big if, but it gives us hope, and I think it puts us in a really good position. And we talk about it all the time, but to be one of the biggest school districts in the state and have no debt is really a unique situation to be in. Last closing statements, 25, 26, Kelly kind of stole my thunder. We start building next year's budget at F&F next month, so if anyone wants to attend, either from the public or the board, we'll be setting up some assumptions that we'll agree on to do some long-range budget forecasting. Because if you don't agree on the assumptions, you never have a forecast. So that's always our first step. And as I mentioned, the new state biennial budget will be happening. Those conversations will start around the first of the year, run to the middle of the summer next year. And then we'll have a new state budget with some guidelines for the next 2 fiscal years. So I know that was a lot, but I know you've heard a lot of it before, so I didn't feel the need to go into super great detail. So if there's any questions, I'd be happy to answer them.
Any questions?
Thanks. I just wanted to follow up on a lot of the conversations that I had with Mr. Clark as putting together this piece. We want to be mindful of the taxpayers on the levy and also to some degree be able to control what we can on events that we can control. And so part of, taking a look at the debt defeasance and pieces that we're doing at that was to really say, we have an option that we could have kept the levy flat, knowing that there's some unknown pieces that are coming with whatever happens with the elections, what happens with the new biannual budget. And the fact is, for me, I've never built a budget based on a bunch of stipulations on budgets that haven't been passed, laws that haven't been passed, and elections that have yet occurred. But I do want to point out that, as Mr. Clark mentioned, our 3-year outlook, which would have a favorable impact to our taxpayers, is really going to be dependent on what happens over the next 6 to 9 months. And those events are not something that this board can control. So a variance to budget would really be with that. Managing the debt, which we will have zero debt within the next 3 years, is our one leverage that we have to be able to use. And so my thought was that we hold on to that and have some type of a cushion pending on what happens over the next years and to where we're going in. And I also wanted to make sure that we could pass on favorability when we knew that we had it to our taxpayers. Just some of my thoughts on where I came to where I came.
Anybody else? Mr. Wad?
Yeah, just a quick clarifying question. So I know we were estimating a levy around 127 million, a little over 127 million. It looks like the revenue limit came in below that by a little bit. Just wondering what drives that delta? Was there an unknown that we got clarification on clarification that we got that allowed us to be able to zero in on that final number? And what was it that kind of brought it down?
Yeah, a couple of things. One thing is you get the certified numbers of the choice programs, the parental choice program and the Racine County choice program. You also get things that get clarified as you work through the system. Transfer of service moved a little. That's a year-to-year snapshot. We just always plug $100,000 in there because it's relatively close. So there's a lot of smaller things that sometimes there might be a kid that, because the pupil count, you submit it in October, basically, October 1st, and then all year they're auditing these things. So you might get 2 more kids than you thought, and if it happened in the prior year, they might give you an exemption for, 1 or 2 kids. So there's a lot of little things like that. But the biggest one would have been the voucher programs or the choice, what I call choice programs. We had estimated 15% on a dollar basis growth. It came in at 14%. Growth, which is good. Again, that's not new revenue. That's just us doing the bookkeeping for the state. But so it's a lot of little things. Nothing. Most of the numbers stayed consistent if you look.
Thank you.
Okay. Sweet. Mrs. Kozlowski. One sec. Thanks. I just wanted to explain a little bit what we have in front of us. So we actually have to take 2 actions tonight, and one is to approve the budget, and then the second would be to approve the levy, if everyone's in agreement on the budget. So, and Mr. Clark has already presented where everything is, and last chance for questions. Okay. Mrs. Kozlowski.
I move to approve the 2024-2025 budget as presented with $219,008,849 in total revenues and $226,725,880 in total expenditures, including a $21,971,912 required operating transfer from Fund 10 to Fund 27 per the Department of Public Instruction's accounting guidelines.
We would need a second.
Second.
Seconded by Mrs. Koenig. Thank you. Any other questions or comments? All right, Mrs. Ettinger, would you take the roll call, please?
Betty Koenig?
Aye.
Mark Borowski?
Aye.
Eric Brooks?
Aye.
David Wad?
Aye.
Anthony Zenobia?
Aye.
Thomas Harland?
Aye.
Carrie Kozlowski?
Aye.
Kelly Piasek?
Aye. Passes 8-0. All right. And so then, just for clarification, the budget that was just passed includes a final tax levy, which is decreasing by 2.47%, and the tax rate, which is increasing from $5.62 to $5.32 per $100,000 of value, property value, or 5.68% compared to fiscal year 2023-24. The final tax rate of $5.32 per $100,000 of property value represents an 11-cent decrease from what was presented at the budget hearing that we had in September. Any further questions about that? Mrs. Kozlowski.
I move to approve the 2024-2025 tax levy for the district in the amount of $390,592, including $3,750,000 for the capital expansion fund and $7,900,000 for the debt service fund.
Second.
Seconded by Mr. Wad. Any questions? All right, Mrs. Ettinger.
Carrie Kozlowski,
Aye.
David Wad,
Aye.
Betty Koenig,
Aye.
Eric Brooks.
Aye.
Mark Borowski.
Aye.
Anthony Zenobia.
Aye.
Thomas Harlan.
Aye.
Kelly Piasek.
Aye, passes 8-0. That concludes our business for this evening, so the meeting is adjourned. Thank you.